I think Philip's aim really for this part was to try and see if we could come up with some objectives really for a kind of a next step, things that might help in terms of pursuing translational electrophysiology further, and things that would really enable us to move things forward. So I know that there were three groups that went out and discussed some of these areas, and I think we kind of covered the three areas that were originally kind of put forward. So, and certainly our discussion encompassed several of those areas. So probably it would be good if John, Andy, and myself we can kind of act as spokesperson for that, and then we can kind of engage in a sort of general discussion. Just kicking off from the discussion that we had upstairs, I might as well kick off first. We talked a lot about some of the things that were ongoing across techniques and across different labs and so on. And one of the key things that we identified really was the importance of having networks and being able to share data. And I think this meeting's been very good for getting people from a lot of different disciplines together, but really at that data level, making that accessible for different people to have access to then maybe to do an analysis on and so on. So having a network and having some way of being able to share that data across the network is going to be really key, and not just, I mean, the MEG was a good example where there are 8 groups in the UK and they're kind of getting together and being able to do that and establish protocols and really establish a really solid network of data. But applying that to different areas as well, and we heard a little bit about the EG network as well earlier today. The other key objective that I think came out of the discussion, and I think it was a clear endorsement of today, was that to have more of these meetings, to have more of a regular opportunity for people to get together and discuss some of the aspects of translational electrophysiology that we've heard about today, and to really have a forum that we can bring those people together. And we kind of explored some of the ideas of what aspects maybe enable some of the things to move forward from where we are now. One of the things that came out of that in terms of looking at different techniques and applying those is actually is modeling and being able to build some kind of models and circuits appropriate to enable us to generate some hypotheses and to test some hypotheses. And in terms of moving forward, I think modeling was one of the sort of people were very positive about using modeling to be able to move forward. And another big thing was actually to enable us to do these kind of meet these kind of challenges was to think big, and it's all very well having little publications from one lab and another lab, and with the small cohorts particularly important in clinical data. Just having small cohorts isn't going to be good enough. You really need to have large cohorts and have that across different labs and large collaborations to be able to really have a big impact on that, and have an impact in terms of funding as well, and being able to really make an important step forward in that area. Those are the kind of the key things. We did have a last kind of little discussion about dealing with clinicians as well, and and that it was important to try and build relationships more with clinicians and to really enable us to forge strong links there.
So actually, it's sort of surprising that we got many of the things that Keith mentioned. We also talked about as well. So we sort of start off by having a good old complain fest about things. So we had problems. And then in red, Tom actually was our scribe, he was great at this, he then wrote our solutions down. So we had problems and then solutions. So one of the things we initially talked a little bit about was the ability to publish translational work, and where the appropriate forums are and how hard it is to get some of these studies published. And I think the main problem there that was identified is that you don't tend to have the reviewers and journals that have access to reviews who know both sides of the story and can appreciate both the clinical and the preclinical experiments and understand why the data is so cool and sexy. So that was a real issue, and and also sort of associated with that also was this idea that Keith touched on already, which is these large amounts of data, which you want to put in the hands of people who analyse it in different ways, have different perspectives. A lot of squiggles are analysed in different ways depending on if you're a clinician or preclinical scientist. And to allow people to access this data, maybe associated with a publication, and curate it in a way where people can come into it and analyse it and actually gain additional value out of this hard-won data, particularly the clinical data is very hard-won. So the solution basically is we want a new journal from Physiology Society, which also provides this great resource for data curation, which anybody can come in and access, and then it also provides a community. So, Dr. X, she produces this beautiful data in the clinic, and Dr. Y, he's working on a rat, and he goes, oh, that's really interesting. Those squiggles look like my squiggles, and they email each other, and then they get together, and great work happens. So that was that. So what else? So another major theme we had was the connection or the collaboration between preclinical scientists and clinicians. And again, I think, Keith, you touched on that as well in your group. How do you get these two sides to really speak more effectively together? And again, part of this is being able to collaborate on data sets is one way to do it. We also thought a lot about potential training. So how can you enhance training? How can you expose clinicians early on to the glories of electrophysiology? And we have a pet, clinical neurophysiologist in our team here as well. So that was really useful. So we had a good dialogue there around how, what are the challenges for clinicians in terms of wanting to do research and understand it's getting potentially worse with NHS changes, which is a real shame. We also had a really good debate from the other side about how do preclinical scientists actually become more knowledgeable about clinical things early on, so that both sides can talk more effectively. So the solution there is better training and collaboration, but we're not quite sure how we do that. I mean, that's actually going to be difficult. But one thing was, I think Stan suggested that we force all medical students to learn electrophysiology right from the start. So that's an idea there. Now, one of the things that this also leads into, which I think is actually a major problem, and certainly I've encountered this when I was at Lilly, and Andy actually was talking a little about this as well, is the mistrust of electrophysiology as a biomarker for clinicians, particularly clinicians high up in companies who are making no-go decisions on, research, development programs of molecules which maybe there's been millions of dollars invested into. Would they reject it based on some squiggles which don't look quite right? And because the problem for them is they're not electrophysiologists. They don't really understand the power and glory and fantasticness of electrophysiology. And so this is a really hard area to get people to really trust electrophysiology, EEG, MEG, particularly clinically, as a valuable biomarker, which you've actually got to. And I think, Andy was saying this, and I remember this actually at Lilly, there were certain cases where the squiggles didn't do the right thing, and there was pretty good evidence it wasn't engaging the target in the brain, but they still went ahead with the clinical development of these molecules, and sure enough, they fail. So that is a major problem. And so again, I think the training of both clinicians, but also the ability of people who are electrophysiologists to actually communicate effectively to the clinicians who aren't electrophysiologists is actually really, really important. And we had some other things here. The other thing I think was patient recruitment, so getting patients to be involved in these studies. So there's a real worry from clinicians, quite rightly so, if they prolong, so yes, clinician recruitment as well, if they prolong their surgery to maybe collect a bit more data when they're implanting an electrode for DBS, for example, they will, it'll harm the patient outcome. That's really important, obviously, not to harm the patient outcome. So getting clinicians who buy into the research and want to be involved is important, but also the public, getting them to want to be involved in this type of research and be able to recruit them into these studies. And that really feeds us back in this public engagement thing, Philip. That's what we should be able to do. Get public excited about electrophysiology. People love brains, they like brain waves, so hopefully get them really sort of engaged so they'd like to participate in these sorts of things. And then funding. We need more funding to support all these activities, which is Wellcome Trust. And MRC and Beavis Hussey and other people. Okay, I'll stop.
So, I think something that's sort of been hinted at by others, and one of the things that came across is there is this need for the various tribes that need to unite in an alliance to sort of push this thing forward. We need to get these people together. They need to talk to each other. And one of the other things is, what's very clear to us is, you do need to engage with the mathematicians and the engineers and the physicists and the people who are really going to be needed to help us deal with this, both from a techniques point of view, from developing things that move forward, but also an analysis point of view. And also, the various stakeholders include, the biomedical scientists, the physiologists, but also the pharma people. When there were people in that room who said, I really don't know about pharma, and a lot of academics just don't know about how pharma works, how drug discovery works, what are the challenges, and people aren't educated about these things. It makes it difficult for them to be able to sort of bring something to the party. So obviously, getting people together to talk and to understand each other's questions is clearly key. I mean, you could say that about any bit of science, but I think with these big challenges such as dealing with translational electrophysiology, this is important. Of course, people can get massive amounts of data, and John wants to deposit it somewhere, but once it's deposited somewhere, it's not going to do anything by itself. So also we need to find ways of prosecuting this data, and really I guess it's the what and how to analyse. I mean, what's important, getting real grips on that, because you could analyse the death out of these vast numbers of data, but actually I think there needs to be focus on what's important and what's going forward. And I don't know those answers. And I guess something else which was touched on by some of the things today, something that was brought up again, is it's something about standardisation of methods. And if you can't standardise because you think your way is better, at least clarity about what you've done. And I think talking to people who sometimes they've gone back to try and do meta-analyses, look at things, it just isn't even clear from the data's there, it's published, it may even be deposited somewhere or whatever, but if you don't really know exactly what they've done, you pretty are much in trouble. I mean, it might sound like an obvious thing to say, but obviously all the real details need to be there. And I think it's quite interesting in the way that some publishing's gone these days with these journals that get shorter and shorter and shorter, methods, supplementary, whatever. And I think as those things happen, people just don't care about the supplementary. They don't write it well. And you go back and you look at it and go, I have no bloody idea what they did, and we need to avoid the changes in publishing, which are all well and good, from actually meaning that the information just isn't there. We also thought about, okay, so how are these things funded? People have sat around here today and thought about the challenges. We don't have the answers, but actually, there are people who have views on this. And we thought, actually, something like challenge-type grant opportunities. So something like the NC3Rs run with the Crackit scheme, which actually does feed into some of this, but actually a thing where, say, a few pharma companies get together, or people with interest in these areas, and say, this is our problem in this translational electrophysiology. These are the things that we really want to solve, and they get together. And then the grant's put out like this. So it's put out for a research, it's more like a research tender. So it's not like your classic scheme where you go, I've got this great idea that, LTP is important and I'm going to show this or something like that, It's really people going, this is the problem, and there's going to be funding behind actually solving this problem. And usually the Crackit scheme usually gives a few teams some money to start, and then one team gets the big prize once they've had to go and made a final bid. So I think actually formalising things in terms of problems and then having money behind them is actually a way that you can bring people across disciplines together, because they'll go around and find someone to actually help them solve the problem. And they're not. If you're writing about just your own research questions, you tend to be a bit more insular thinking if you just put in your standard project grant. But to solve a problem, you suddenly realise, well, I need to find someone else, and I'll go and find someone else, and they're probably just in a building over the road or down somewhere else. And I guess there's always this thought that although there's a lot of fancy and expensive technology here, are people still sometimes using the best thing? Are there actually other technologies out there and other analysis methods that are being used outside of biomedical sciences that we're missing out on? Are there things in the way other people are working, and even beyond biological sciences? There's an awful lot of stuff that we think maybe we're not, people are using methods that maybe 20, 25 years old, and that's what they've grown up with, and that's what works, and that's what the referees of their papers are used to seeing. But maybe there are better ways, and we should always have a mind on thinking about those sorts of things.
I'm not going to say too much, apart from just to say, first of all, thanks to John, Andy, and also to Keith, and all of you for coming along and participating, and especially, of course, the speakers. We will sit down and try and get something out of this, and it may be that we have a shorter, more focused meeting just in terms of the follow-up and what some ideas are and taking it forward. How we do that, I don't know if we get a smaller working group together, or we'll communicate with you all, though. We'll keep you on a list and make sure you're aware of what's going on. Because that's what I want out of these sort of H3 symposium. I don't just want them to be a discussion and a meeting. I want them something to come out of it that is tangible. And I think this is clearly a community, which sounds like you don't get together that often in this sort of network. And if we can help facilitate that going forward, I think we'll have at least achieved something. So thank you very much, and also thank you to those who are doing the webcasting, and any final guys who are still hanging on at the other end online. So thank you, and you can email us in the FISSOC with any follow-up thoughts from online. Thank you.